I didn't know my marriage had apparently turned into a group experiment. That realization came later. At the time, all I knew was that my wife, Vivian, was acting like I had personally inconvenienced her by existing in the same room. It was Friday night. We were getting ready for a birthday thing at a friend's place. Nothing dramatic, just one of those small gatherings that somehow ends up with 20 people, loud music, and someone aggressively defending their playlist like it's a personality trait. Normally, getting ready with Vivian was its own little routine. I would be halfway dressed, looking for my belt like it had filed for witness protection, and she would be standing in front of the mirror, doing that final layer of whatever women apply to their faces right before they tell men they are almost ready. We'd joke. She'd roll her eyes, maybe smile. We'd leave late and blame each other. That night, something felt off. Not anger, not tension, just controlled distance. Like she had quietly decided to take a step back without telling me why. I walked out of the bedroom, buttoning my shirt. Did we decide wine or the gift bag? She didn't look at me. Gift bag. The blue one or the one that looks like it lost a fight? The blue one. Good. Love emotionally stable packaging. Nothing. I leaned on the doorframe. You okay? I'm fine. Of course. I'm fine. The most versatile lie in the English language. I tried again. You sure? Because your tone says fine, but your face says I should start apologizing preemptively. She exhaled. Can we not do this? Do what? Talk? I just want to get through the evening without a whole thing. I paused, looked around, just in case there was another husband somewhere causing problems. A whole thing, I repeated. Interesting. I've said maybe 10 words and half of them were about gift bags. She grabbed her purse. Are you ready? At that point, I had two options. Push and turn it into an argument, or step back and see what this was. I chose step back. Yeah, I said, picking up the gift. In the elevator, she stared at her phone. I watched her reflection and ran through the usual explanations. Maybe she's tired. Maybe work was bad. Maybe I missed something. Men are very good at inventing reasonable explanations before accepting an unreasonable reality. That lasted about 10 minutes. In the car, I said, if Greg plays 80s pop again, I'm leaving you there on principle. She nodded without looking up. You hear me? Another nod. I glanced at her. You even want to be there tonight? Does it matter? I let out a short laugh. Depends. Are we being philosophical or just difficult early? That got a look. Quick. Sharp. Good. At least I still existed enough to irritate her. You don't have to make everything a joke, she said. I don't. Just the parts that would otherwise become uncomfortable. Silence. We drove the rest of the way in that quiet where even the turn signal feels loud. When we got there, Greg opened the door like he was hosting a festival. There they are, my favorite couple. Bold claim, I muttered. Very little research behind it. He laughed and clapped my shoulder. Vivian smiled at him immediately. Warm, easy, natural. That was the first little needle. Not because she smiled at another human being, but because it had taken Greg exactly 1 second to get the expression I'd spent the last hour being denied for the crime of existing in her direction. We stepped inside. People, drinks, music, normal atmosphere. For the first few minutes, everything felt almost fine. Then it started. In the kitchen, Vivian was talking to Serena and Dana, the unofficial board of directors for other people's relationships. I walked up beside her. Hey, has anyone identified who brought that goat cheese on New Year's? I still think it was a crime. Serena laughed. Dana smirked. Vivian didn't even turn. Okay, maybe she didn't hear. So I repeated, slightly louder. The goat cheese. We deserve answers. Without missing a beat, she said to Dana, Wait, what was the name of that restaurant you mentioned? Dana answered her. Serena's eyes flicked toward me for a second, then away. And there it was. The tiny social sting that's too small to call out without sounding sensitive, but too deliberate to ignore. I stood there for half a second, smiling the way people smile when they've just been slapped with a silk glove in front of witnesses. Then I said, "Fantastic. Glad the goat cheese issue is finally being handled with the seriousness it deserves," and walked off. Was it rude? Yes. Was it enough to make a scene? No. So I let it go. Later, in the living room, someone asked how long Vivian and I had been together. 7 years, I said. Almost 8 if you count the early chaos, Vivian added. That's cute, someone said. Cute isn't the word I'd use, I replied. Survivable, maybe. Vivian smiled at the woman. He's being dramatic. He'd die without me. I opened my mouth, and she had already turned away to another conversation. Again, tiny moment. But it was starting to stack. At the drinks table, I tried again. I'm grabbing a beer. You want anything? Nothing. I waited. She kept talking. I leaned closer. Vivian? Drink? I'm good, she said, still not looking at me. Then immediately continued her story to Nina, like I was background noise. That's when it shifted from weird to pattern. Every time I spoke to her, she ignored it, or answered minimally, or redirected away from me entirely. No open hostility, no scene, just subtraction. I moved to the balcony for a bit, talking with Greg and a couple of guys about something pointless involving air fryers and personality. I can handle myself socially. I don't need to orbit my wife to function. But I kept noticing things. A glance between her and Serena. A smirk from Dana. That quiet, shared awareness people have when they're watching something unfold. Then came the moment that made it clear. We were all around the table, telling travel stories. I jumped in with, I still think my best airport moment was when security stopped me because I apparently looked like a man carrying illegal cheese. A few people laughed. Vivian looked directly at me, made eye contact, then turned to someone else. You were saying something about Barcelona, right? Conversation shifted. Smooth, clean, intentional. That was it. Because now I knew. She heard me every time. This wasn't mood. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. I took a sip of my beer and looked at her across the table. Serena glanced at me, then at Vivienne. They were watching, waiting, for a reaction, for confusion, maybe frustration. And suddenly everything clicked into place. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being tested. And the funny thing about realizing you're in a test is, you can choose not to answer the questions the way they expect. The irritation dropped almost instantly. Not gone, just reorganized. Cooler, more precise. I wasn't going to chase my own wife around asking if she heard me. I wasn't repeating myself, and I definitely wasn't performing hurt feelings for an audience. If she wanted to act like I wasn't there, I could be very cooperative. A few minutes later, I ended up near the hallway table talking to Claire. I knew her casually. Smart, easy to talk to. One of those rare people who actually listens instead of waiting to speak. She looked at me and said, "You look like you're either about to tell a joke or file a complaint." "Why not both?" I said. "I believe in efficiency." She laughed. "That tracks." "There it is," she added. "What?" "That expression, like you've accepted chaos and are now just observing it. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me near a bowl of hummus." She laughed again, properly this time, and just like that, I relaxed. Funny how easy it is to be normal when someone treats you like a person. We started talking, work, dumb office politics, the usual. I told her about a guy who said circle back 7 times in one meeting like repetition would turn it into strategy. She almost choked laughing. "Oh my God, I know that guy." "No, you know his species," I said. "They survive on jargon and misplaced confidence." She covered her mouth, still laughing. "That's painfully accurate. And dangerous. Say synergy 3 times and a manager appears." Now, was I enjoying that conversation? Absolutely. Did I also notice from the corner of my eye that Vivian had looked over? Also, yes. I didn't turn, didn't invite her in, didn't adjust. Claire kept talking. I leaned in slightly to hear her better over the music. Normal, completely normal. But sometimes normal becomes very noticeable when someone expects you to stay focused on them no matter how they treat you. A minute later, I heard Vivian laugh somewhere behind me. A little louder than necessary. New. Interesting. I didn't look. I just kept talking. Because by then, I understood exactly what was happening. Vivian expected me to chase her attention. Instead, I gave it to people who knew how to respond. Good. That was the point where the room started shifting. Not dramatically. No music stopped, nobody dropped a glass, no one announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, the dynamic has changed." But something subtle tilted. Because for the first time that evening, I wasn't orbiting Vivian's attention. I was elsewhere. And people notice elsewhere. Claire was telling me about a client who insisted on minimalism and then sent 27 revision notes. So minimalism, I said, but emotionally complicated. Exactly, she laughed. He wanted less, but also more. Ah, yes, the relationship model. She shook her head, smiling. You're terrible. I'm efficient. I reduce nonsense to its core components. And what are the core components tonight? She asked. I took a sip of my beer, thinking for half a second. Bad music, decent snacks, and at least one person rethinking their life choices. She raised a brow. Only one? I'm being optimistic. She laughed again, and I noticed something interesting. Not just that she was laughing, but how easy it was. No effort, no weird pauses, no conversational dead ends. Just flow. That's when you really feel contrast. Not when something is bad, but when something else is simply normal. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Vivian. She had shifted positions, subtle but intentional. Now she was angled just enough to have a clear line of sight toward where I was standing, not looking directly, but aware. I ignored it. Claire kept talking, and I stayed in the conversation, giving her my full attention. Another minute passed, then two. Then I heard it. That same laugh from Vivian, but sharper this time. A little too timed. A little too placed. The kind of laugh people use when they want to be noticed without turning their head. Claire paused mid-sentence and glanced briefly past me. Is everything okay over there? I didn't turn. Statistically, probably not. She smirked. You're not even going to look? Nope. Bold strategy. I prefer consistent strategy. She studied me for a second, then nodded slightly like she understood more than I had actually said. And that was when the first real shift happened. Vivian moved, not dramatically. She didn't march over or call my name. That would have broken the image she was maintaining. Instead, she did something much more controlled. She joined a nearby conversation, close enough to be heard, close enough to intersect, close enough to exist in my space again. I still didn't acknowledge it. Claire was in the middle of describing how her client had once rejected a design because it felt too emotionally available, which I maintained was the funniest criticism I'd heard all week. That's not even feedback, I said. That's a confession, she laughed. Exactly. Behind me, I heard Vivian's voice enter another conversation, slightly louder than before. So I told him, if you don't like it, maybe you just don't understand it. There it was. Volume increase, proximity increase, engagement, redirected. I took a slow breath, not because I was upset, but because I could feel where this was going. She was adjusting, testing a new angle. The original plan, ignore me, watch me react, wasn't producing the expected results. So now she was trying to reinsert herself into my awareness without directly breaking character. Smart. Predictable. I kept talking to Claire. Didn't shift my body even slightly in Vivian's direction. That lasted maybe another minute before escalation number 2. A guy I vaguely knew, Mark, I think, joined us. What are we talking about? He asked. Terrible clients, Claire said. And emotional minimalism, I added. Mark laughed. That sounds exhausting. It is, Claire said. But apparently everything is these days. Mark nodded, then glanced between us. You two look like you're having way more fun than the rest of the room. Low bar, I said. But yes. And that's when it happened. Vivian stepped closer. Close enough now that she didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't look at me directly. Of course not. She addressed Claire. So what are you guys laughing about? There it was. First direct re-entry. But notice the framing. Not what are you laughing about to me. Not even a glance in my direction. She was still maintaining the illusion. Claire answered naturally. Just work stories. Vivian smiled. Must be nice. I feel like I've been stuck in the same conversations all night. That was a line, light, casual, but loaded. Because now she was signaling two things at once. 1, she was aware of me having a good time. 2, she was positioning herself as slightly excluded. Interesting shift. I took a sip of my drink and stayed quiet. Claire nodded. You can join? We're just complaining. Vivian laughed lightly. Oh, I'm very good at that. Still not looking at me. Still not acknowledging me. Still playing the same game, just closer now. Claire glanced at me briefly, like she was checking if there was context she was missing. There was, but I wasn't about to narrate it for the room. Vivian continued. So what's the worst client story? Claire started answering. I listened, but I also noticed something else. Vivian was now slightly angled toward me. Not fully, just enough that if I turned, we'd make eye contact immediately, which meant she was waiting for it, waiting for me to engage, to acknowledge her presence again, to close the loop she had opened. I didn't, because the moment I did, the entire dynamic would reset back in her favor. Instead, I let Claire finish her story, laughed at the right moment, and added my own comment like Vivian wasn't standing 2 feet away conducting a quiet experiment on social gravity. That was when the third shift hit. Vivian interrupted, not aggressively, not rudely enough to call out, but enough. Wait, she said, placing a hand lightly on Claire's arm. That reminds me, did I tell you about that dinner we went to last week? Claire paused, polite. No? Vivian started talking, and just like that, she took control of the conversation. Smooth, practiced, redirected attention. Classic. Claire listened, nodding. Mark chimed in. The group subtly pivoted toward Vivian, and for a brief moment, everything looked normal again. Except it wasn't. Because now I was on the outside of the conversation she had just pulled herself into, which, ironically, is exactly where she had been putting me all evening. I stood there, listening to her story. Something about a restaurant, a waiter, and an overcomplicated menu. And I could feel the expectation hanging in the air. This was the reset point. This was where I was supposed to re-engage. Laugh. Add something. Re-enter her orbit. Instead, I did something much simpler. I finished my drink, set the empty bottle on the nearby table, and said to Claire, I'm grabbing another one. You want anything? Claire shook her head. I'm good. Cool. I didn't look at Vivian, didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the story she had just used to reclaim the spotlight. I just stepped away. And that's when the control slipped. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Because ignoring someone who is trying to get your attention, that hits very differently than ignoring someone who is trying to get yours. Behind me, I heard her voice falter for half a second. Just a fraction. Barely noticeable. But real. And as I walked toward the kitchen, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Because now the game had changed. She wasn't observing anymore. She was reacting. I didn't go back to the same spot right away. I grabbed another beer in the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and let the noise of the party blur into something distant and unimportant, giving myself a second to just exist without trying to decode whatever had been happening between me and Vivian for the past hour. Then I figured I should find the bathroom before it became a line-based social experiment. Bathroom? I asked a guy nearby. He pointed down the hallway. Second door on the right. Perfect, I replied. If I don't come back, assume I made poor life choices. He laughed, and I headed down the hallway, the music fading behind me as the atmosphere shifted from loud and crowded to quiet and almost detached, like stepping out of a scene and into something behind it. I was halfway down the corridor when I heard my name. "I don't get it," Vivian said. There was a kind of sharpness in her voice that hadn't been there earlier, something less controlled, less composed, like whatever she had been carefully managing all evening was starting to slip just a little. I didn't turn around, and I didn't step closer, but I stopped just enough to hear, because sometimes you learn more from what people say when they don't expect you to be listening. "He's not reacting," she continued. And now there was frustration in it, clear and unfiltered in a way she hadn't allowed herself in public. "What do you mean?" Serena asked, her tone curious rather than concerned. "I mean exactly that," Vivian said, a little sharper now. "He's just acting normal, talking to people, laughing, like nothing's happening." Then Dana spoke, a bit more directly. "Wait, so he didn't even try to talk to you?" Vivian let out a quiet breath, the kind people release when something isn't going the way they planned. "At first he did, but after that, he just stopped." Serena lowered her voice slightly. "Maybe he figured it out." "No," Vivian said quickly, almost too quickly. "He wouldn't. He's not like that." I couldn't help the faint smile that crossed my face at that, standing there in the dim hallway, listening to my own personality being discussed like a predictable pattern. Dana let out a quiet laugh. "Well, something's different. You said he always reacts." "I know," Vivian replied, and now there was irritation in her voice that she wasn't even trying to fully hide. Then she exhaled and lowered her tone, as if she was suddenly aware of how it sounded. "That's the whole point. He's supposed to notice. That's literally the point." And just like that, everything clicked into place with a kind of quiet, almost disappointing clarity. Serena asked the obvious question. "Okay, but what exactly were you expecting?" Vivian hesitated, just for a moment, and that hesitation said more than any answer could have. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice softer now, less certain. "Just something, for him to try, to push, to react." I stood there for a second longer, leaning lightly against the wall, letting that sink in, not because I needed more confirmation, but because there's a certain kind of clarity that deserves a moment before you move on from it. There was no confusion left, no guessing, no, maybe I'm overthinking this. This wasn't mood or distance or miscommunication. This was intentional. She had created distance on purpose. That was enough for me. I pushed off the wall quietly and continued down the hallway, finished what I had come there to do like a normal person who definitely hadn't just overheard a breakdown of his own relationship dynamics, and then made my way back toward the noise of the party. Everything looked exactly the same when I stepped back into the room. Same music, same people, same conversations. But for me, it was completely different. Because now I wasn't guessing anymore. Now I knew exactly what this was. I took a slow sip of my beer, looked around the room for another place to stand, another place to talk, and moved in that direction without even glancing at Vivian, who had returned to everyone again. Because if she wanted to run an experiment, the least I could do was give her honest results. I moved toward the same group I had been talking to earlier, picked up the thread of the conversation like nothing had happened, and let things flow naturally again. Easy jokes, light back and forth, normal human interaction that didn't require me to earn the right to be acknowledged. And for a while, it worked exactly the way it should. Which is to say, nothing felt forced. People laughed. Someone brought up travel again. Claire made another comment about her impossible client. I didn't need to look at Vivian to know that something had changed. The room felt it. Those subtle shifts in attention, the way conversations slightly slow down when something is off, the way people start noticing where others are standing, who is talking to whom, who isn't. At some point, Claire leaned a little closer and said under her breath, "Okay, I'm not imagining this, right?" "Imagining what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. She glanced past me briefly. There's something weird going on. I took a sip of my beer. There usually is. Because right on cue, Vivian stepped in. She didn't look at me at first, which would have been almost funny if it wasn't so predictable, and instead addressed the group like she was just casually joining in. So, she said lightly, what are we all talking about now? She wasn't here to join. She was here to pull, to reset the dynamic, to get something back. I stayed quiet, listening, letting her talk, not interrupting, not helping, not resisting, just existing in the same space without giving her anything extra. And that's when she shifted. She laughed at something that wasn't particularly funny, then added, honestly, I feel like I've barely talked to you all night. It was framed as a group statement, but it wasn't. Because the moment she said it, her eyes moved, not to Claire, not to anyone else, to me. First direct hit, light, but clear. I met her gaze for half a second, then looked back at Claire like the moment didn't require a response. That was enough. Because now she had to escalate. And she did. Oh wait, she said, tilting her head slightly, voice still calm but tighter underneath. Or maybe you've just been busy. This time, there was no pretending it wasn't directed at me. The group felt it. Claire didn't speak. Neither did Mark. Smart again. Then I looked at Vivian. Calm, not aggressive. You okay? She asked. That question landed differently than it sounded. Not concern, not really. More like a test disguised as care. I nodded once. Yeah, she exhaled, sharper this time. You've been distant. A few people shifted slightly, not moving away, but becoming very aware they were standing inside something that wasn't entirely casual anymore. I tilted my head just slightly. Have I? Yes, she said, more firmly now. You have. I let that sit for a second, then gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. Interesting. That word annoyed her. I could see it immediately. Because it wasn't the reaction she wanted. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't apologetic. It didn't give her anything to work with. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. You've spent the entire evening acting like I'm not here, I said calmly. I figured I shouldn't interrupt. Vivian blinked once like she hadn't expected it to be said out loud, at least not like that. I didn't, she started. If someone doesn't want attention, I continued evenly, you don't force it on them. Another pause. Longer now, heavier, because there was no aggression in it. Vivian opened her mouth again, but nothing came out immediately. For the first time that night, she didn't have control of the narrative. She glanced briefly at Serena, who suddenly looked very interested in the floor. That was telling. I let a second pass, then another. Then I gave a small nod, like the conversation had reached its natural end. And just like that, I stepped out of it. No argument, no escalation, no scene beyond what had already happened. I picked up my jacket from the chair nearby, turned back just enough to say, "Have a good night," to no one in particular, and walked away. Behind me, the room didn't explode. It didn't need to. Because the silence I left behind said everything. And for the first time that evening, Vivian wasn't the one controlling how things looked. The night air hit differently when I stepped outside. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet. The kind of quiet you get when you leave a room where something just shifted, and you don't feel the need to explain yourself to anyone still inside it. I didn't rush, didn't replay the conversation in my head, didn't check my phone. I just walked to the car, got in, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, letting the stillness settle properly instead of filling it with unnecessary thoughts. The drive home was calm, no music, no internal monologue trying to justify anything, just a straight line between what happened and what it meant. By the time I got home, I wasn't angry. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the apartment felt exactly the way it should. Quiet, familiar, untouched by whatever had played out earlier. I set my keys down, took off my jacket, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen counter. No pacing, no dramatic sighs, just normal. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Vivian walked in fast, like someone who had spent the entire ride home building a version of the conversation in her head and was now ready to deliver it. She closed the door behind her a little harder than necessary. "There you are," she said. I glanced up. That's usually where I am when I leave a party. Not my sharpest line. Didn't need to be. She took a step closer, clearly holding something back. "You left." "I did." "You didn't even say anything." "I said goodnight." "That's not the same thing," she snapped. "What exactly would you have preferred?" I asked calmly. "A speech?" "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," she exhaled sharply. "You embarrassed me." That one almost made me smile. "Did I?" I asked. "Interesting." "Yes, you did," she said, stepping closer. "You made it into a whole thing in front of everyone." I held her gaze steady. "I didn't make it into anything." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is pretending I wasn't there for most of the night and then acting surprised when I stopped participating." She opened her mouth, then stopped, like she was trying to decide which version of the story she wanted to go with. "That's not what I was doing," she said finally. Silence stretched between us for a second. Then she tried a different angle. "I was just pulling back a little," she said, her tone shifting slightly, softer now, more explanatory. "I wanted to see how you'd react." There it was. Out loud this time. No hallway, no closed door. "You wanted to see how I'd react," I repeated. "Yes," she said, like it made sense. I nodded slowly. "And what exactly were you expecting?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Just something. For you to notice, to try, to care." I almost laughed, but not in a way that would have helped. "I did notice," I said calmly. "That was never the issue." She frowned. "Then why did you just stop?" "Because I'm not going to compete for basic attention," I said, still evenly. "If someone decides to act like I'm not there, I'm not going to chase them around proving I exist." That's not what this was. It is exactly what it looked like. She shook her head, frustrated now. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm reacting differently than you expected." That landed. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, quieter now. "I didn't say you were," I replied, "but intent doesn't change how something works." Another pause, then she said it. "Well, my friend said—" She looked at me, caught between defending herself and realizing she had just stepped into something worse. "They didn't mean anything bad," she said anyway. "I'm sure they didn't," I replied. "Most bad advice doesn't come with a warning label." She hesitated for a second, then let out a frustrated breath, like holding it in was suddenly more exhausting than just saying it. "They just said—" she started, then stopped, realizing too late that she was already halfway into it. I didn't interrupt. "They said I should pull back," she continued, her voice tighter now. "Not give you attention right away, see how you react, just to, shake things up a little." There it was, not dressed up anymore, not vague. Clear, direct, almost disappointing in how simple it sounded once spoken out loud. "So this was a lesson," I said calmly. "You ignoring me all evening? That was you trying to teach me something?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "It was just—" "A test?" I cut in, still without raising my voice. "An experiment? A strategy?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her silence did the job. I let that hang for a second, then looked at her properly. Not angry, not emotional, just steady. "If you want to see how someone behaves," I said, "you don't start by treating them like they don't exist." She crossed her arms slightly, defensive now. "I just wanted you to react. You've been so distant lately." I gave a small, almost incredulous nod. "So, your solution," I said, "was to ignore me in public and see if I'd chase you?" That's exactly what that is," I said. cutting her off again, just enough to stop the spin before it started. She looked away for a second, then back at me, frustration and something else mixed together, something closer to uncertainty. "They said it would work," she muttered, and that was the part that mattered. Not the behavior, not even the situation, but that sentence. I exhaled slowly, then shook my head once. "That's the problem," I said. She frowned. "What is?" "That you'd rather listen to people who aren't in this relationship than actually think about what you're doing inside it. That's not fair." "It is," I said calmly, "because they don't have to deal with the outcome. You do, and now so do I." Silence. She didn't argue this time, didn't deflect, didn't reframe. I stepped a little closer, not aggressively, just enough that she couldn't pretend this was still some abstract conversation. "If you keep taking advice like that," I said evenly, holding her gaze, "you're going to end up exactly where that kind of advice leads." She swallowed slightly. "And where's that?" I didn't hesitate. "Alone." The word didn't need emphasis, didn't need volume. It landed on its own. "If you keep listening to your friends and their dumb little lessons," I added, just as calmly, "you're going to teach yourself right out of a relationship." She didn't respond, not right away. And for the first time since she walked in, she didn't look like she had something ready to say. No argument, no defense, just silence. I gave a small nod, like that was enough, because it was. I turned, walked past her, and headed toward the bedroom without waiting for a reply. A few days passed before things settled. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily, like two people finally choosing to act normal again instead of testing each other. Vivian didn't bring up her friends' advice again. In fact, she stopped quoting them altogether, like she had quietly realized that outside voices are very confident when they don't have to live with the consequences. There were no more experiments, no silent games, no attempts to manufacture reactions, just direct conversations. Sometimes uncomfortable, but real. And funny enough, that did more for us than any strategy ever could. Things didn't just go back to how they were before. They got better. Because this time, neither of us was pretending not to see what was right in front of us. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.